Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the classic original 62 book series, and it's book number 9, Welcome to Camp Nightmare. Now, I'm reviewing this book for a viewer out there named the Gamer Bros. Now, the Gamer Bros had entered my 525 subscriber Q&A. They filled out everything they needed to fill out for the contest, and I had the drawing where I drew two people. I already did G King's book, which was a Nine-Tiered Tower, and the Gamer Bros had picked Welcome to Camp Nightmare, and their name was drawn. So I decided to um, do the contest winners in a row, and this is the final one for the 3 contest winners. If you want to go back and watch these past videos, I did the Haunting Hour mascot, then I did a Nine-Tiered Tower, and now I'm doing Welcome to Camp Nightmare. So, off the bat, Welcome to Camp Nightmare, going back in memory, was definitely one of the first, 15 Goosebumps books I read. I don't think it was in my first 10. It might have been. It gets kind of blurry. I know my definitive first 5, but this had to be around, between 10 to 15, in that range. I read this one really early on. I remember this being in my 4th grade teacher's classroom. It's one of the few books she had, and I remember reading this a couple of times. I used to be in love with this book. I never quite loved it as much as Ghost Camp, or that book is just on a different level for me. But it was always very close. But for some reason, coming back to it after antiquating myself back into Goosebumps and reading so many stories, I figured, based on how many people still love this book, that I would be one that still loved it. But I think this book is kind of downgraded for me. And this does happen from time to time with certain things. Sometimes certain things grow on me more, and some things just kind of lose their luster a little bit. I think this is one of the scenarios where I still quite love this book in certain ways, and I think that it's still completionist core at the heart of it, as I would peg it. But I think this book just doesn't hit the same as it did when I was a kid. But I still think this book has tremendous qualities about it that I will praise, for sure. But, yeah, anywho, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I want to save a lot when I want to say for the review portion. So let's get into the plot of review without giving too much away. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you up front. This book, I say this sometimes, and I kind of do a good job for keeping on track with how many instances go on in certain books. This book has quite a lot of things that happen in it. I'm going to miss a few little things here and there. Probably skim over a few things just because there's so many things that happen in this book. I don't really care to sit through and explain it all. I'll be here for an hour. So I'm going to start off with kind of a rudimentary way and try to keep it like that for this book specifically. Okay. So essentially, the main character you need to know is named Billy. Now, Billy is this 12-year-old boy, and he's on this bus ride on his way to this camp called Camp Night Moon. And you learn a little about Billy and his life. Billy has 2 parents. They're well-renowned researchers and scientists. They go on a lot of expeditions. And Billy's on his way to the summer camp known as Camp Night Moon to have a little bit of adventure. And on the bus, Billy meets a cavalcade of characters. Of course, you get introduced to characters like Colin, and Jay, and Mike. And those are the 3 boy protagonists, side character protagonists that we'll see that Billy becomes bunkmates with when he arrives at camp. And then there's these 2 girls named Dawn and Dory. Now, Billy has his eye on Dawn, and they kind of exchange glances, and the boys are heckling the girls, and there's trying to be conversations taking place. There's a fun scene during the bus ride where the bus driver puts on a mask to scare the kids. It's a lighthearted thing during the bus ride. It kind of sets up this atmosphere that these kids are about to go have fun and potentially might be scared. So the bus ride's going all good. And then eventually they randomly stop at this corner near this deserted place. And they're ordered to get off the bus. And the bus driver starts taking out the luggage and giving it to the kids. And the kids are like, "Where are we?" And the bus driver doesn't respond and just gets in the bus and drives away. And the kids are kind of left there stranded. Now, when the kids are stranded, they start to freak out a little bit. And then they look over to the woods and they see the leaves rustling. And then they see like these beast-looking creatures, multiple of them, like kind of like lycanthropy or wolf-like characters or something like that. I think that's what it's described like, something similar to that. And they seem pretty vicious. And there's a pretty jarring scene, pretty scary, where there's a couple of close encounters with these things. But then there's a deterrent that's shot to scare these creatures off, and the person who shot this deterrent was this character we come to know as Uncle Al. And Uncle Al is the person behind organizing Camp Night Moon. And Camp Night Moon is this boys and girls camp, but the boys have their own side of the camp on one side of the river or lake or something like that, and the girls camp has the other side. So Uncle Al announces that this is where they'll be meeting up to head back to the boys camp into the girls camp. And of course they all truck along and they're like, "Oh, this is really weird. These creatures are weird," and they don't know what to make of it yet, but they arrive to camp, and the boys head to their bunk, and I think it's like bunk number 4 or cabin number 4 or something like that. And we see Billy, the main character, enter the cabin with Mike, Colin, and Jay that we meet early on in the bus ride. Now, little personality things you need to know about these characters is that Billy, the main character, is set up like the smart one. Billy has street smarts. Billy is experienced in life. Billy knows a lot more than the other boys know. Mike is kind of, I don't know, comes off kind of whiny a little bit, but understandably whiny based on what happens to him, but we'll get into that in just a minute. Jay, in my opinion, is a little annoying, but he's kind of like an eclectic character, kind of all over the place. And then Colin is this skinny kid who dresses in all black and wears like bandanas and stuff, trying to look cool with his sunglasses. You know, he's that kind of character. So they get into their bunk, and while they're in their bunk, they try to get situated and where they want to sleep. And Mike finds a snake in his bed, and the snake bites Mike, and this freaks him out, and he gets worried. His hand's bleeding. It appears to be gushing blood, kind of gory, which is pretty cool. But Billy thinks quickly and gets the snake wrapped in a sheet and throws it out of the window. Now, cuts into their camp counselor that will be bunking in the same cabin as them, known as Larry. Larry comes in and questions them about what they were doing, and they tell him about what's going on with Mike. And what happens is, essentially, Larry looks at it and he goes, "Oh," and he goes to grab bandages and offers bandages to him. And Larry seems cool at first, but when they ask the question, like, "We got to get him to a nurse," and Larry's response is, "There is no nurse. I mean, you're just gonna have to suck it up. It's Camp Night Moon. I mean, there's not gonna be anybody to help you." So this really alarms the boys, and Mike has to basically put up with the pain, essentially. Now, what happens is that the first night there is an event that everybody is going to be going to, and that Mike is going to have to basically tough it out and go try to find, at least maybe try to wander around, maybe find a nurse, or just tough it out and go to the event. So Mike does a little bit of both with Billy. Billy becomes kind of like the caretaker to Mike. And they go to this campfire event later that night, and basically it just everybody hangs out, and Uncle Al kind of goes into more depth about the rules of the camp, about what's expected there, all that. Um, I think in the episode version, I usually get the episode version and the book version mixed up. I think he gives the rules at the camp in the book, and I think in the episode, I think he gives it like when they first get there. I don't know. It could be either or, but at some point, it doesn't really matter. They know the rules of the camp, and there's this element that's expressed in the rules that should never be entered, and that is the forbidden bunk. And Uncle Al basically confirms that nobody should go into the forbidden bunk. And later that night, all the boys come back to the cabin and are contemplating on sneaking out. And Larry overhears and says, "You shouldn't sneak out. And here's why. It's because there's this creature named Saber." Now, Saber is said to be this beast-like creature, kind of hinted by Larry. But Larry won't really explain what it is. And this freaks the boys out, which, makes them kind of hard of sleeping because, there's already a lot of creatures. They already countered those wolf-like creatures. There's a snake in people's bed, in Mike's bed, and people are acting weird with information. It's kind of feeling like it's kind of hard to trust people. But, the boys still manage to go to sleep despite that. And the next morning, it comes to a challenge they have to go to. They have to go to this baseball-type game where they have to play. And they form teams, and Mike says he's injured and wants to sit out for a little bit to kind of lay down, and Larry lets him lay down in the shade. And they start playing, and during the game, Larry beams a baseball into the back of Colin's head out of anger, based on a call that Uncle Al made. And checking out Colin, he was pretty bad. There was a crack in his skull. The book was very graphic about that. And essentially, Colin had to be taken to back to the lodge of Uncle Al to, check him out and make sure he's all right. And then Mike went along with, because Mike's hand was still hurting from the snake bite. So they go back to the lodge, and all the other boys decide to go back to the cabin and get prepared to do another event. And Billy decides to wait around, for Mike. Later on, Colin returns. And when Colin returns, that's when Larry starts to be like, okay, well, where's Mike? And he goes to look into the drawer of Mike's drawer, and none of his clothes are there. And, seems like he was just here and now he's just vanished. And they don't know what to think of it, right? So the story, from that point, Billy starts to get really paranoid about Mike's disappearance and really thinks he has to ask Uncle Al what's going on. Well, it comes to an event after Mike disappears that they have to go camping outside in a tent, and this is going to be Colin and Jay's big moment. Oh, not Colin and Jay, but Jay and this other kid named Roger. So Roger is another character we meet in the story, kind of. He's from another, I think, bunk with a different camp counselor. But Jay and this kid named Roger have this plan on sneaking off and going into the forbidden bunk. And Billy is wary. He doesn't really want to go. He's kind of freaked out about Mike. He doesn't think it's a good idea. He doesn't want to break the rules. But at the same time, he also wants to be the caretaker of Colin to make sure he's all right during the tenting excursion. So Jay and Roger sneak off to go to the forbidden bunk, and immediately they hear Billy and Colin hear some screams in the distance, and Billy gets freaked out and tries to go investigate the lodge. He manages to get inside, and there's this really creepy scene where he stumbles across Jay, who's telling him this beast got Roger. This beast got Roger, and they try to escape without getting hurt by the beast, and they go back to Colin, and then they escape into safety, and they essentially are now at a loss for words of what to do. Larry's nowhere to be found. Larry seemingly disappeared himself, so they have to hide out in their bunk overnight to try to keep out from the outside. They're like, we're not camping outside. The boys manage to go to sleep, and they wake up the next day, and the first thing they think they need to do is go confront Larry at the mess hall, and they confront Larry, and Larry basically tells them that he didn't hear anything. He was at the, nearby Uncle Al's lodge the night before. He would have heard if there was screaming, because the forbidden bunk is nearby. And he's like, you didn't hear that? You didn't hear all the screaming that was happening? All those noises? He said no. And Billy started to get really suspicious about Larry, but he couldn't do anything. So Larry says, get ready to go swimming, and just let's try to get your mind off of it. So now that Roger is now missing and Mike is missing, Larry, Jay, not Larry, Billy, Jay, and Colin, sorry, there's a lot of characters to remember. They go back and they get ready to go to the pool, but Jay is freaked out because Jay basically was like screaming at Larry to go stop eating breakfast and go look for Roger, even though that it was Jay and Roger's fault for sneaking out, going to the forbidden bunk. And that part of the story really soured my taste with Jay, because I'm like, really? You're the one that messed up, and now you expect Larry to fix all the problems you caused? Like, that's just... I'll get into that near the end of the video, but yeah, that really annoyed me. So, anyways, they get ready to go swimming in the lake, and when they get there, Colin's still not feeling too well, and Jay doesn't really feel like much of swimming, especially when they hear the bombshell that Larry brings. So when they hear this bombshell, I think, so what happens is that there's an altercation with Larry and or Uncle Al, kind of revealing that there's this notion that both of them don't believe that Roger exists at the camp. There's no record of Roger existing, right? So when this information gets relayed to Jay and to Colin, they just want to go back. Jay's on the verge of tears, and Colin doesn't want to hang around either. He's not really feeling well. So they go and try to head back to the cabin in the bunk they're staying at. But Billy feels so stressed about it all, he wants to stay by and swim for a little. Then he's pulled into the bushes. He has no idea what's pulling him in there. And to his surprise, it's these two girls from the bus from earlier on in the book. It's Dory, and I think her name is Dawn. And Dawn and Dory tell these horrific stories that have been happening at the girls' camp. And Billy basically says, hey, these exact same things are happening at our camp. People are disappearing, and nobody has any answers, and nobody's giving us any answers. And Dawn and Dory are hiding out, trying to stay away from the girls' camp because they're trying to make an escape. And Billy's like, okay, well, I'm going to try to help you, and we'll figure out something to do. So with that thought, Billy leaves them behind so they can swim back to camp and get back undetected. So Billy decides to go back to the camp, and he sees, sorry, I'm blanking, Jay and Colin laying by the bunk, and he tells them that what just happened. And then Jay and Colin can't stay to talk about it because they have to go hiking later, and Billy is not going to be able to go hiking because it's not his turn to go. And Billy essentially has to stay behind while this other counselor takes Jay and Colin to go on this 3-mile hiking excursion. for the rest of the day, and they'll come back later at night for dinner. Now, while this is going on, um, it's revealed to Billy that he's going to be doing a canoe excursion the following day. So later on, it comes time for dinner. He's decided to listen to Uncle Al's advice after this weird altercation. I don't want to spoil it because it's kind of a pivotal part of the book. But he starts writing home to kind of vent his letter. But he can't help but notice that his friends aren't back to the cabin yet. So he decides to, hide his letter from Larry because he doesn't want to. He's been doing this. He starts to not trust Larry. So he decides to go to the mess hall and take his mind off things, maybe eat the food. The food isn't the greatest, but he's going to try to get his mind off. He goes there for a while. There's like a random relay race that happens in there, and he's just taking his mind off everything. But when he gets back from dinner, there's these two random boys in his bunk. He's like, "Who are you two?" They're like, "Oh, we just got here." And he's like, "Are you supposed to be in bunk 4?" They're like, "Yeah." He's like, "Those beds are already taken." And he tries to ask if they've seen Jay and Colin, and they don't know who they're talking about. And he goes to look in their drawers, and they're empty of all their things. And of course, when Larry comes back, he asks Larry, "Where's Colin and Jay?" He goes, "I have no idea who you're talking about." And this freaks him out, but there's nothing else he can do. He's going to have to try to get some sleep and get his, wake up the next day. He's made an official plan by this point that there's just going to be this parent visiting day that once it comes around, he's going to escape. But at some point, you'll find out that visiting day was announced by Uncle Al to be canceled. But one of the biggest pivotal stories, part of the story is about to come up when Larry had told Billy about the canoe trip, and he goes and gets ready with Larry in the morning to get on the canoe. And of course, these two other new boys in his cabin are also going to be tagging along. And they go on to the river and start rafting. It takes a while for them to get the hang of it, but once they make it downstream a little bit, Larry loses his balance and falls into the river and starts to drown a little bit. And he goes missing, essentially. And Billy takes the initiative to jump into the water and save him, and he has to fight, use all of his energy, but he eventually finds Larry and pulls him onto the mud, and Larry comes to, and once they realize that the other boys are downstream because they had to leave them on the boat, they decided to walk back to camp. They're like, "Are we going to go back?" And Billy's like, "Are we going to go back and get them?" And Larry's like, "I hope they make it back." Like, Larry doesn't care, but he's like kind of thankful at the same time about the boys. So they immediately go back to camp, and they immediately go to Uncle Al and tell them everything about what happened with the canoe. And Larry explains how Billy saved his life, and Billy explains, like, "Yeah, I saved him, but we don't know what happened to the other kids." And Uncle Al was more concerned with the canoe, of all things. Like, there's no regard for their life. So this really sends Billy over the edge, and Billy's really contemplating on trying to find a way to escape more than ever. But an opportunity arises at an unexpected time. So the next day rolls around, and he's randomly woken up by Larry, and there's a surprise meeting being held by Uncle Al. And Uncle Al is taking all the campers, and they're going to be meeting up with the girl campers for some type of event. Now, they're marching, and he's asking questions about all the people in his head, and he's saying that he's going to have to find a way to escape. They're going to be in this prime location. He can escape now, things like that. And then when they arrived at this location, Uncle Al and all these camp counselors that have been like dressed in camo and carrying these bags start pulling out rifles. But they're tranquilizer rifles, but they pull out these rifles and start giving them to the boys. And they try to give one to Bill, and he goes, "All right, There's 2 people missing. These are the descriptions. They've escaped the girls' camp. We're going to have to track them down and shoot them. And Billy's like, oh, I'm not going to kill them. And he's like, who said, and Uncle Al's like, who said anything about killing? These are tranquilizers. We need to stop them. And knowing that it's Dawn and Dory that escaped, Billy's like, you know what? I'm not going to shoot them. And Uncle Al tests him and tries to call him out, but Billy's not backing down. And he points the gun at Uncle Al. And the situation builds and builds and builds until the whole tension releases. And then a big revelation happens for Billy. A big coup d'etat moment, really recontextualizes the whole book, like turns it upside down. And it's revealed that everything may have not have been what it seemed for Billy. And maybe there's a grander thing going on with the whole story. Not so cleanly wrapped up in a bow, but it's wrapped up, and that's basically where it ends. And that's essentially Welcome to Camp Nightmare. Now let's get into the strengths of this book. I think off the bat, Billy's a great character. He does have some more insecure moments here and there. He's not as consistently heroic. He's kind of all over the place, but very relatable. Easily one of the best protagonists I've read in a Goosebumps book, just based on his heroism and his bravery. Just really good character. Like I said, street smart, very savvy. The supporting cast was fun. The character dynamics, no character was the same, even though one character does make me mad, but I'll get into that in a minute. This was a very fun book because of the characters. Uncle Al was cool, Larry was cool. All the characters had this synergy together. There's some like mystery thriller aspect to this book that really works and really captivates the mind. The atmosphere really enhances that element of the book. There's a lot of stuff going on, but the stuff that is consistent throughout the book is there. There's some solid themes working here with like trust and, you know, like bravery and sticking up for what is right. That is like blatantly there in the book. It has a really impactful lesson for the main character to learn by the end, as you'll come to find out, but I'm not going to spoil the ending. Yeah, it had a little bit of blood in it. It had some tense moments, pretty scary stuff. I mean, it works. It works as a Goosebumps book very well. Easily one of the most memorable Goosebumps books in terms of moments in the book. One of my favorite moments was the scene where Larry almost drowns. Like that scene is so good, ridiculously good. Now with negatives, I do have some negatives, and I'm gonna kind of start this one. Really, I can kind of summarize my negatives in like one huge thing here. I essentially have 2 things wrong with it. The absolute ending of this book isn't the biggest detriment, but I just think that this ending, it's a little too convenient for me. It feels like a convenient ending, even though it is kind of foreshadowed in the book. The camp is called Camp Night Moon, and that's as far as I'm going to go with the hints. There's foreshadowing to the ending, and it kind of resolves in a payoff kind of way, but it does feel kind of loose in a way. It doesn't feel like the greatest ending to me. I know some people outright hate this ending for it feeling like a total big fake out, but that's kind of what this story is predicated on, for it being I don't want to kind of give it a name, but the style of the story is kind of predicated on having an ending like that, so I can't be too harsh on it because almost every story like it has a similar ending. But do I like it necessarily? Not really. But my biggest issue I have with this book is that there's just so many things going on. So many camp events, there's so many different animals and legends and characters to keep up with. There's so many things that, like Saber on the cover of the book is hardly in it. I mean, so many things that just really take me back, especially by the end. Saber doesn't get resolved. There's some characters that fail to come back. There's a lot of things going on in the book that I think that if it was just more concentrated and focused on one thing and then another, it would have been better, I guess. But, you know, these are issues I didn't see before, but I'm just now seeing. There's just a lot going on for me to keep up with, and I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of a annoying thing to start reading something like, wait, when did this happen? I had to go back and like keep up with it. There's a lot going on in the plot, kind of jumbled. Not bad jumbled, but it's jumbled to the point where it's noticeable for me, and it kind of takes it back for me. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I decided to deduct zero point 0.5 collectively for my issues I had, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It's gone down in my love, but I still think this book is an A. It's a low A, but very solid book. I highly recommend reading this if you have never read it before. Sorry for such a long review. I just had a lot to say. There's a lot of plot in this book. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts about Welcome to Camp Nightmare. Let me know down in the comment section if you have read this book before. Do you love this book or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.